Thank you for the opportunity to present today's webinar, which is entitled B'nai Mitzvah Teaching, Fitting the Strategy to the Student. My name is Howard Blas. I'm the director of the Tikva program at Camp Ramah in New England, which is an 8-week overnight camping program, inclusion program, and vocational training program for approximately 60 campers and young adults with disabilities. I'm a consultant to the National Ramah Commission on Disabilities Camping, where I work with our 8 Ramah camps around issues of disability. I'm also a writer for various Jewish publications, and I live in New York City with my wife and 4 children. Today, I'm here in the capacity of lifelong lover of teaching all types of learners for bar and bat mitzvah. I have been blessed to work with families of all backgrounds and affiliations, Reform, conservative, Orthodox, unaffiliated, you name it. I have always been fascinated by the ways people learn and by their various strengths and weaknesses. How come certain people, like my wife, can fix anything and I can fix nothing? Every year, I have the honor of attending the NCLD, the National Center for Learning Disabilities, benefit dinner in New York City. Every year, they showcase people with learning disabilities who are also brilliant and talented, and oftentimes are captains of industry who are very successful. A few years ago, a young man was given a scholarship for advanced studies. In his acceptance speech, he described his struggles reading and processing language. But give him a car engine, he could take it apart, rebuild it, reassemble it without written instructions or guidance. Think back on your own experiences, learning in school, learning on the job. We all have different ways in. I believe the same applies to learning for bar and bat mitzvah, and our students can probably help us find the best approach if we'd only ask them. Every man remembers his bar mitzvah day and the process of studying for bar mitzvah. And since 1929, or maybe even way earlier, when bat mitzvah was instituted, but especially in the last 30 or 40 years, women remember the process of learning for their bat mitzvahs. The power of this memory is one compelling reason to make the process a smooth, comfortable one. Let me tell you about my own bar mitzvah preparation experience circa 1977, which I assume is fairly typical. About 6 months before the actual bar mitzvah, a group of boys were assigned to the cantor for many sessions of learning Trope. We met each week to learn the Trope, or the Ta'amim, or Ta'amei Hamikra, the biblical cantillation. Those are the musical notes which appear under or over the words as we learn Torah or Haftarah reading. We would learn a few tropes a week from a certain sequence. We'd sing along with the cantor. Once we completed the class, we were then allowed to meet weekly with the cantor to get a look at our own portions. Now, if you look at this slide, I've given you a sense of what this process looks like. So on the right, in the Hebrew, you'll see a box that says Mapach, Pashta, Zakif, Katon. So these are the names of all of the ta'amim, all of the tropes, and they all get sung a certain way, as the box above suggests. So to give you an idea, the part in the box says Mapach, Pashta, Zakif, Katon, or from the top, Pashta, Munach, Zarka, Munach, Segol, Munach, Munach, Revi. So this is a taste. This is one person's tune. Each teacher has a slightly different tune, which they learn from his or her teacher. There are different tunes for Torah reading and for Haftarah and for Megillas like the Book of Esther and the Book of Ruth. Once a student masters the sequence of notes through the Trope class, they move on to working with the teacher on his or her unique portion. Now the middle slide, it's not so clear, but that is the Torah reading from the portion called Bishalach in the book of Exodus. And the student begins with the teacher's help to apply the trope to his or her unique portion. And once he masters that, he shifts over to what appears on the far left, which is an actual page of Torah, which has no periods or commas, no musical notes, really no landmarks for where to start and stop. So of course, this system assumes that one can read Hebrew and that one can remember the tropes, keep all the notes in one's head, and that one can apply them, which means like transpose them onto one's unique portion. It's very logical for sure, but it's not so simple. So you can imagine how this might break down for certain types of learners. The truth is, the system of learning and of course performing is difficult for many types of learners. For sure, it is hard for those who can't read Hebrew well or at all. I've listed for some people for whom the system breaks down. Let's say there are issues around cognitive functioning or around Hebrew language learning, visual and auditory processing, memory issues, attentional issues, if there are emotional behavioral issues. In my previous URJ Ruderman webinar entitled Making B'nai Mitzvah Shidduch, Matching the Service to the Learner, I addressed a range of bar and bat mitzvah options for learners with various special needs like the ones noted above. It explores Shabbat and non-Shabbat services, as well as various in and out of synagogue options. In today's webinar, I will focus more on the learning process than on the ceremony and on performing. So where do we begin? So I began looking for Google images of bewildered learners, which you're looking at here. I suggest that we begin not with the Trope class, but by getting to know the learner. I find that while many students may have attended bar or bat mitzvahs, say of a relative or a friend, they don't necessarily have any idea how the kid learned all that he did. What will the process look like? It may seem very scary. Perhaps the child is wondering, will I have to stop playing soccer this year, or hanging out after school with my friends, or going to the movies or baseball games on the weekends? Start with the basics. What is expected? What is the end product? What does the Torah reading look like in the Torah? How do we get there? Are we talking about learning 3 lines or 200 lines? How often will we meet? How many minutes of practicing will one need during the course of a given week? Perhaps letting the student know that you've prepared many students and many types of learners, including those with differences in learning style, may be useful. I will often take out the Torah reading and I'll show them exactly what we're aiming to achieve. I will use the first lesson with the student to really begin to engage the student. Do you remember that mouthwash or toothpaste commercial from so many years ago which said, "You never get a second chance to make a first impression"? This is it. We all make quick judgments. So I will do things like ask questions that show that I'm interested in the child. I'll pick up on clues. If I'm working in the child's room and I see that he has a Minnesota Vikings helmet or a New York Rangers hockey puck, I may comment on it. Or if they have music posters, I may ask them the kind of music they listen to. And I also find that this is bar mitzvah teaching. It's not therapy. It's not psychoanalysis. It's okay to tell things about myself. I'll tell them the teams that I like, or I'll tell them about my musical interests, or a concert that I went to, a sporting event that I read about, or a cool video. And I think it really helps with the engagement process. Then I might move on to subtly assessing ways he or she learns. What music do you listen to? And I may go into more detail once they tell me. Do you listen on your iPod? Do you listen on the radio? Are you the kind of person who listens to, if it's New York, I'll say Z100, which is a popular New York radio station? Are you the kind of kid who listens to Z100 when you're getting dressed in the morning and you always seem to learn the songs even without the words in front of you? Now, of course, if the answer is yes, he's given me a very good clue that he's an auditory learner and that maybe he's not going to even need the trope or need the music in front of him. He's going to get it by hearing. I may ask, do you play an instrument? If they play piano, they might be able to use the musical notes as a helpful tool. If they play drums, maybe they like tapping out the rhythms. I might ask, do you enjoy art? Well, what kind? Do you like to draw? Do you like to paint? It might give me a clue that they're particularly visual. And as I'll show you in a few slides, I may actually color the different sequences of notes. I might ask, are you the kind of kid who likes math or logic or puzzles? Um, if so, they might be the kind of kid who thinks of learning the whole portion sequence by sequence as like cracking a code. So after I'm done with my questioning, I might think of ways to incorporate these strengths and talents into learning for bar mitzvah. And I also might ask them if they have any suggestions of their own. Oftentimes, kids have a lot of insight into how they learn. Just anecdotally, I've found there have been some cases where I've taught kids who attend private schools for kids with learning issues, learning style differences, I'll say. And in one case, I worked with one boy, and he knew very well how he learned. And he found out that I was about to soon work with one of his peers. And he said, no, when you work with Johnny, you're going to have to work with him very differently because Johnny learns this way. And I thought that was really beautiful. So ask kids about how they learn and how they need to be taught. So based on this rather informal assessment, I might suggest a game plan. Now, it needn't be only informal. It's possible that the child has had a neuropsych evaluation. It's possible that the parents really understand how he or she learns and can really tell you, so you're not really going in blind. So, if a child can read Hebrew and is a visual learner, I might do what I suggested earlier about color coding the sequences. So if you think back to that initial slide that showed the tropes on the right side and the Torah portion in the middle and what it looks like in the Torah on the far left, I might take a certain sequence of notes and color code them. And kids love it if I bring in 12 highlighters and I dump them out on the desk and I say, pick the one that you love the most. What's your favorite color? Kids know, they'll right away pick a color. And I'll say, pick one that you want to see a lot of. So we'll go with one of the most common sequences. And I'll say, okay, let's go with the katon sequences or the et nachta sequences. And we'll start coloring it throughout the Haftarah. Again, there are different approaches. Some teachers might decide to look at the entire reading and color that sequence throughout. I tend to do a little bit of that, but I'll focus on the first line or two, and I'll say, okay, you're responsible for looking for the purple ones, and just sing the purple ones when we get to them, but I'm going to sing everything. So that way, they're working on the visual part, but they also get the auditory at the same time. And again, they're really working on cracking this code because already, maybe 2 lessons or 3 lessons into it, in this case, they've covered the pink sequence, they've colored the blue sequence, they've colored the orange, and they're beginning to get a sense of how this game works. Now, if we're talking about learning the Haftarah, we have a little bit of a gift and a little bit of a trick. So just to begin, I'll sing it just to give you the idea. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Now that little snippet already tells us Kadma mapach pashta munach katon. Mapach pashta munach katon. So if somebody can learn the blessings before the Haftarah, and there's a very reasonable chance that they've heard this so many times that they may even know the song, we can then go back to the song that they know and begin color coding it and show them how much of the Haftarah they already know. And they feel great because they're already pretty far along, even before the first lesson. If the child is an auditory learner, so that's the kid who's getting dressed in the morning and listening to Z100 and picking up all the songs, I would go with singing. Sing to them, sing with them, make recordings with them during the lesson. I actually suspect that a fair number of learners can learn their Torah reading, their Haftarah, and their prayers simply by hearing it, good old-fashioned memorizing. Why fight a strength? So I'll use my camp example. At my Jewish summer camp at Camp Vermont, New England, in our disabilities program, we pray the morning service. We have about a 30-minute service. We pray every morning for half an hour for 8 weeks. And these are young adults with autism and with Down syndrome, with other cognitive disabilities. And I can tell you that by hearing the same service every day for 2 months, they pick it up. Or another example is the Birkat Hamazon, the grace after meals. If you hear something over and over and over again, they pick it up to the point that they know much more than their parents because they just simply by exposure. So I would say if you're inclined towards music and you love it, go with it. It doesn't mean that looking at the words is going to hurt, but certainly this might be the way in. Some learners are more kinesthetic learners. So I would say if they're kinesthetic, get moving. Kinesthetic learners do things when they're actively involved, when they're engaged, when they're using their hands, when they're doing crafts, when they're moving, when they're dancing, when they're doing yoga. I once worked with a boy, and to be honest, I worried that if his parents or even the authorities walked in to the room during our lesson, that I would be reprimanded or fired or maybe even arrested. Max and I were standing on the furniture, hanging up the transliterated large print version of all of his prayers around the top of his room with tape, and we were singing. And we each had 2 drumsticks in our hand, and we were banging on the dressers. And you know what? It worked for Max. Max could not wait for me to come each week and stand on the furniture with him and bang on the furniture. It worked. Another time, I worked with a boy. They lived in a house, and they had a swing set, and we sat on the swings. We would swing for most of the lesson, singing songs and prayers, and he picked it up. He just liked that, being engaged through his whole body. I had a bar mitzvah student just yesterday who happens to be one of the most motoric, in-motion kids I have ever met. And he told me that he listens best when he's throwing the rubber ball at the wall and catching it in his glove. And he said, I'm paying attention. And you know what? He really was paying attention, and he took in everything. Without looking, he picked up the Torah reading that way. Some kids drum, others throw balls, they do yoga, they paint, they draw. Let it go. I think that more classroom teachers are finding that some kids need to stand up during the lesson. They need to walk around. They need to use fidgets to engage themselves kinesthetically. It is A-OK to mix and match approaches. One need not be purely visual or purely auditory or purely kinesthetic. I hope by now that you're seeing that bar mitzvah lessons need not take place only at a table. I tend to ask families what they're comfortable with. Some kids need to sit at a table, and they focus much better when you're sitting next to him or her, keeping them anchored. Some kids do well on the sofa or on the floor, and I always tell them, look, I had young kids once. I'm used to being on the floor. It's not beneath my dignity to sit on the floor and have the lesson on the floor, sit in a beanbag chair, to sit on the porch, really anywhere, as long as the parents are comfortable with that. I find that the more senses I engage, the better. See it, hear it, sing it, bang out the rhythm, get up and move around. There are many, many ways to reach the goal. So what are some other tools? So as I say in the slide, transliteration isn't against the law. So what is transliteration? Transliteration is writing it out as you hear it in Hebrew. So if I said Baruch, that would mean the person trying to figure out how Baruch sounds to him. Is it B-O-R or B-A-R, or what should be the convention for a ch in Hebrew? And there are ways to find transliteration online. There's a wonderful site which is free. It's called Navigating the Bible. It's bible.ort.org. And every single Torah portion and every Haftarah is written out in Hebrew, but also with transliteration. If you wanted to go with a more standard transliteration, I'm always able to come and play around with the font size and spacing. I could put one line on a page. I could put a couple words on a line. And I'll have a conversation with a student. But some students really prefer to write it out as they hear it. And what's beautiful about what you see here, I believe this is from the child's Haftarah from many years ago, it's nobody else could read what this child wrote. But it worked for him. He wrote it out by hand, and he can go back and read it. Um, so that I actually even want to share a story. I know of a story of one Orthodox rabbi who even allowed the student to have this next to the Torah or next to the Haftarah reading, and his answer was that this is Torah too. That for this student, this was Torah, and it really worked. So the first piece we saw was somebody who wrote it out. This is a student who felt more comfortable typing it. He would have thought that the first student's was chicken scratch. This was much better. If it's typed, you could put several words. You could put a whole phrase on a line. You could put one word on a line. You could do spacing. Here is a student who I think is totally awesome and brilliant. As we wrote out the words to his Torah reading, the way he heard it, he made up musical ups and downs. Essentially, he was inventing trope. If he heard something go down, like there's a trope that's called Rivi'i, goes Rivi'i going down. He was able to write the ups and the downs in a way that would remind him how the singing goes. The child also had perfect pitch, something I certainly don't have. This guy would have me sing it, and then I would sing it again, and then he would say, no, that's not what you sang the first time. What, I would say? No, he explained he could hear the difference. So, wow, maybe he should have gotten a better teacher, but it really worked for him. So now that we have a method or some methods that might work, how do we get them to practice between lessons? To which I would say, good luck with that. So be creative. Obviously, we should make our expectations clear. I would always say, look, if you're going to practice an hour between our lessons, please don't spend it practicing. Don't spend the hour before I come practicing for an hour. You'll go out of your mind. It'll be very boring and monotonous, hearing the same thing over and over and over again. It's more effective to practice for 5 or 10 minutes, over the course of the week each day. Be creative. I have learned to embrace rather than fight against computers and iPads and iPhones and all types of technology. I think that the same seemingly boring, repetitive task on a piece of technology is suddenly no longer boring. The example I have here of one student, when I recorded it for him, I made a recording, and he said, can we use Photo Booth? And I said, what is Photo Booth? And he showed me Photo Booth. So this is something on an Apple computer. It gives you, it's a video. You not only do you get the audio, but you get the video. And the reason I chose these photos is because you could see the kids singing. You could see their mouth. You could see their facial structure. And the student said, look, it would really help me to see your mouth when you're singing so that I could listen to it and also see how your mouth is forming the different words. Making an audio recording wasn't enough for him. He liked to see the mouth. So I recorded it for him. And then I would ask him for the next time, could you also make me a recording? Can you send me a recording? And again, kids love this. It's so easy nowadays. They can whip out their iPhone. They can send it to you as a text message or as an email. Even with kids in summer camp, some camps are willing to let you practice. But they can come to the director's office. They can use Skype. They can use FaceTime. It is just so simple. And making a recording is simple as well. It is crucial to include parents in the process. First, show them what you are setting out to do and how you plan to get there. So just like the student really has no idea what you're setting to do, the parents might remember their own learning experience, but they might not know what's expected in their particular temple. I have a friend, Leah, who is both a singer, an actress, and also a bar bat mitzvah teacher. And she used to sit down with the parents and explain the trope as follows. And she would compare it to listening to opera in another language. If you go hear Italian opera, you might not hear the words, but you get because it's in a different language, but you get a sense of the dramatic parts. So she might say something like, tell the story. She was going to the store and then. So you know that something dramatic is about to happen. And she would show them that the musical symbols really indicate where to pause, where to go down, where something dramatic is about to happen. So the parents really got it, even if they didn't know how to read Hebrew and if they didn't know Trope. Show the parents what you're doing, what you intend to use as an approach. Give them feedback. Um, Make sure they should let you know if the child is feeling panicked and stressed. You might not know that. Strategize with them. Ask. Say, you're the expert on your kid. What kind of feedback have you had? How do you find your child learns things when he has to learn Casey at the bat to present in school? How did he do it, or how did he learn those lines of Shakespeare to present? Talk to them about practicing during the week and your expectations. They're the ones who live with him. Additionally, communicate with the rabbi and the cantor. Different synagogues have different structures, or the bar mitzvah coordinator. Let them know that you are on track, or if you are not on track, because there are going to be ramifications if the kid falls short, who's going to pick up the slack. And what do we do as the day approaches? So this is what you get when you Google stage fright for images. We started the presentation talking about focusing on the process over product, meaning on the learning process over the day. We also talked about demystifying the process. It is true that the process is most important, but the truth is there is a product. There is an expectation of standing up and performing or presenting what has been learned. So why not help the child get used to it? He may think it's hokey, but I might have a child from time to time stand up while we're in the house and read standing up as opposed to sitting down or slouched over or sprawled out on the sofa or on the floor. Go to the table in the kitchen or in the dining room and have him practice. Maybe on occasion do it in the living room and have the family there. Maybe have them spread out to the furthest point in the house and say, "I can't hear you, it's too fast." They'll roll their eyes and think it's hokey, but it'll really help. Then maybe even go to the empty synagogue and try it there. How does it feel standing up in front of all those empty seats, which will then be filled? I've played around with this a lot with students. I've had people go to the morning minyan when they're just about to start or finish, and just practice when there's a few people in the room. I find it very hard to predict who is going to find it scary to get up in front of people. I worked with a student who was very, very talented. There were no known learning issues or performance issues. And as it got closer, he was panic stricken and he didn't want to sing. I would try to say, okay, let me turn down my volume a little bit and turn up your volume as a joke to be playful. He didn't take the bait. And to be honest, I got a little bit nervous. I didn't want to show that to him, but I spoke with his family and came up with a plan. And we had about the next 10 lessons in the synagogue. And little by little by little, he warmed up. But that was very unforeseen. I did not expect that this was going to be a child where he was going to be nervous on the day. To wrap up, to conclude our talk on B'nai Mitzvah teaching, fitting the strategy to the student, I would begin by assessing either formally or informally how the student learns best. Make sure to have a connection with him, because once you get off to a bad start, it's hard to get back on a good track. Have a good rapport. Let the student know that you're in it with him or her, that you're in this together. Come up with a game plan, but don't be afraid to change the plan as you go along. Maybe Trope isn't going to work, or maybe that is just the right approach. Be eclectic, try many different things, keep the parents and the clergy in the loop, and be mindful of process, but also think about the day. And I would say, if I could be of help, feel free to call. I'm happy to talk with you about various strategies. Thank you very much.